Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Northwest Side Town Hall on early intervention, which we're going to learn all about. I am State Representative Lindsay LaPointe of the 19th House District, which covers much of the far northwest side of Chicago and some of the suburbs. And we have a few co-hosts tonight, some of whom are here, and we're so thrilled to have my colleague Representative Will Guzzardi, some of whom can't be here because they are literally debating really important bills on the Senate floor in Springfield, which is Senator Cristina Pasiones Zayas, and another co-host is Representative, now leader, Jamie Andrade of the 40th House District, and we all represent parts of the far northwest side. Just a few words really before we get started and before I kick it over to Representative Guzzardi. It is Early Childhood Advocacy Week, and that is one of the reasons we're talking about early intervention tonight. And early childhood advocacy, early childhood, it is what it sounds like. It's kind of what are we doing to take care of our youngest people, and what systems and programs do we put around our youngest people and our families? And of course, by design, it's foundational. This is the beginning. This is how we build strong families, neighborhoods, communities, and cities. So I'm super excited to have this conversation. We have some amazing people here. For the most part, people will introduce themselves so they can talk a little bit about who they are and why they're here tonight. So for now, I'm just going to kick it over to Representative Will Guzzardi of the 39th House District.
Thank you so much, Representative LaPointe. Good evening, everyone. My name is Will Guzzardi. I'm the state rep, as Representative LaPointe said, from the district immediately south of her is the 39th District, which is parts of Logan Square, Belmont, Cragen, Portage Park, a couple other neighborhoods on the northwest side. I'm so excited to be here this evening. I want to start just by thanking those providers who are on the call this evening, the EI therapists and other early intervention professionals who are joining us tonight or watching this. The work that you do is so incredibly valuable for our children and for our families and communities. Early intervention, we're going to learn a lot about early intervention tonight, but it's this incredible tool that is available to our families who have children who are experiencing developmental delays or developmental disabilities. And I think what we'll hear tonight is that it has transformed the lives of so many young children and their families and led to just incredible, successful outcomes for those families. I think it's a sort of, that if we can have these targeted interventions when these children are very young, we can see an entire lifetime transformed. So I'm a huge proponent of this incredible intervention. And I want to say briefly that I know there's a bunch of legislation related to EI this year. I think my senator, Senator Pasiones Zayas, who's not available to join us tonight, but I know she'd want to put in a plug for the bill that she's working on, which is around telehealth for early intervention. We've done some telehealth for EI during the COVID-19 pandemic to make sure that children who had these kind of therapies available to them were able to continue and persist with those therapies. And I think it's been a big success, and we've seen more people have access to early intervention than otherwise would have as a result of it. So I think her legislation would seek to make that telehealth provision permanent. I think it's a great idea. We have a responsibility as a legislature to, when we see successful interventions like this that are really changing people's lives, to step in and provide the support, the funding and the coverage and the support for those kinds of interventions. So this is an amazing opportunity for us to do more and better by our families. So I'm looking forward to working with Representative LaPointe, with Senator Pasiones Zayas, with the advocates who are here with us on the call tonight, to making sure that early intervention is available to every child who needs it in Illinois. Thank you so much for having me this evening.
Thanks so much, Representative Guzzardi, for being here and sharing why you're excited about and why you are interested in early childhood advocacy and early intervention in particular. Just a quick thing I want to share about early intervention, the specific program that we're going to hear about from a variety of perspectives, including the parent perspective, is that this is, even though I'm somebody who worked in social work before I was a legislator, and even worked in childcare assistance for low-income families at Illinois Action for Children, which is a major stakeholder when it comes to these issues. I didn't have a lot of background about the specific early intervention program that we have here in the state of Illinois. But once I got to my role of state rep and started having more in-depth conversations with people in the communities I represent across the far northwest side, and always asked people, as we do, what big issues do you care about the most? Or, what are some good things going on in state government? What are some concerns in state government? EI was one of the rare things that I heard really positive feedback on, and that really stood out to me. Just very specific conversations where families would share with me, oh, you're from the state, you want to hear what I care about at the state? I care about this really tremendous early intervention program that I participated in, where people came to my house and helped my child and my family. So therefore, here we are, we're going to pull back the curtains and hear more of the details of the program. So just so you know what you're getting into tonight, we'll probably be on for about an hour. And we're going to hear an overview of the EI program from Roberta, who plays more of a coordinator, bird's eye view level when it comes to early intervention. And then we get to hear from two parents about their experience and their reflections on the EI program. And then if we have time, well, first of all, of course, we're going to take questions. So please be thinking about those questions. And if we have time, we're going to touch a little bit on advocacy efforts to make sure EI and things like EI and things that support early childhood and early childhood education have the support that they need. So that's the plan. And now I'm so thrilled to be able to turn it over to Roberta Hansen. And Roberta, you're on mute.
Good way to start, huh? Hi, everyone. And thanks for coming to this forum just to talk about a program in Illinois that I'm really proud of. That's the DHS Early Intervention Program. And I forward it with that because some people use the term early intervention for any kind of therapy for children that are young. This one's very specific. It's a developmental program that looks at just the learning and education. If you think of this as education for infants and toddlers, okay? And before you roll your eyes, some of you older, grandmas like me that that say they all learn at their own pace, know that a child hears millions and learns millions of words in the first 3 years. And if they can't hear, they're not going to be able to learn those words. So we are very much about early intervention, starting early. The earlier you start, the better. This program is open to any person who lives in Illinois, any child who lives in Illinois, and regardless of income. So higher income, there is a fee, a sliding fee for them. Those that are on Medicare, it's covered by the Medicare insurance. And it's really open for everyone. The evaluations are at no cost to the family. And if a child is eligible either by a 30% delay or an at-risk condition or a medical condition, they can be an automatic eligibility. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And who can refer? Anyone can refer. I want to tell you that right now because some parents like me, this was decades ago, that I knew something wasn't quite right with my daughter. And I asked my doctor about it. And he said, oh, she'll grow out of it. Well, 6 months later, it had decreased even more, her abilities. So we kept, knocking on his door and asking and ringing. And finally, he introduced us to the early intervention program. And I've got to say, Illinois, I'm so proud of them. They have parent liaisons that some other states do not. They open it up for everyone. And quite frankly, if you compare us across other states, the eligibility of 30% in one area, a delay in 30%, is more inclusive than most. So I'll put it that way. Who can refer to us? Again, anyone. How would you refer to us? And that's, I'm glad that you asked that. And we're going to put, I believe, in the chat a website that you can look up. But if you live on the north side of Chicago, you would just dial in and call 312-942-7800. And if you have any barriers to getting through, I'll give my email in the chat when I'm done. If you're not sure if your child, if you say, I'm not sure if my child is developing typically, whatever that is, right? I recommend the cdc.gov milestone tracker. You can put that on your phone and it will tell you at 2 months, baby should be doing this. At 4 months, the baby should be doing this. These are just milestones, and it's okay if you're a little behind or a little ahead. It's great either way. But that way, if you're not sure that at 6 months, a kiddo should be trying to sit up. And if that's not happening, go ahead and make a referral. You don't have to wait for your doctor. You can ask them, and they're very helpful in finding the right person, but you don't have to wait. So what's the process once you've made a referral? Once we get all the information we need, because we do have to know your address, there's 25 offices in the state. Mine covers the north side. So once we know which office you belong at, we assign the case to a service coordinator. That coordinator then will call you for an intake appointment to get the birth history, to find out what your concerns are, what your family routines are, because we want to really use you as the parent as the first teacher. And it's a coaching model. This is not like a clinical therapy where you go in and the therapist does all the work. It should not be. It's where someone comes and coaches you as the parent or caregiver to do the services, because we believe that just multiplies the power of the knowledge that we're giving you. We're not having one person do it for 1 hour. It's being multiplied throughout the entire week. Okay. So after the intake, there are some consents that need to be signed. Once that's done, we set up the evaluation. After the evaluation, you will know if your child is eligible or not, if there's a 30% delay, whether that's in speech and there's some feeding issues, whether that's a child who's 2 and just not saying more than a couple of words, whether there's a behavior issue, motor, physical issues, the child's not trying to pull to a stand, not able to hold the head up in a strong way. And what am I missing? Behavior, speech, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and behavioral. So some kiddos just have attention issues like me, and they need a little help with redirecting that behavior. So we have behavioral help as well. All that to say, if you get in on one service in one area with a 30% delay, if there's concerns in other areas, we'll serve those areas as well. So a plan is written up, and then therapy begins, and the therapist in normal times, whatever that is, would have come to your home or to your daycare or to grandma's house, wherever the natural environment is, to do those services. Through COVID, we've started live video visits, and I hope we get a chance to talk more about this after, but that just means that so many more families are being served. It's not ideal for everyone, but to the extent possible for a lot of families that were waiting on services in tough to serve neighborhoods, it's been great to be able to use video visits. And anyone who has questions about that, I can give links as to what that might look like. The EI Clearinghouse, which I believe we're going to put in the chat, some of the links to there, they actually have videos you can watch a session. Okay. And so we would do the services, and then we would reevaluate every 6 months to a year, depending on the child and when you came in. And then when the child is getting close to turning 3, if they still need services, and know that the majority, a lot of kids don't need services anymore after 3. But for the ones who do, we transition them into specialized services with Chicago Public Schools. And again, we do trainings. It's kind of a complicated process, but you're able to get in a preschool setting, a 3 to 5-year-old class, therapies within a half-day program. So we get that transition, and that's when we do that gentle handoff to CPS. Let's just see if I missed anything here. I don't think so. I think this is a good time, unless we're going to hold questions to the end, I think, just to segue into getting what's it actually look like and what was it like for you as parents. So I'm going to hand it off to the parents.
Thank you so much, Roberta. And thank you again, Lindsay and Rep. Gazzardo and the rest, or Rep. Gazzardi and the rest of your colleagues for hosting this tonight. So my name is Carrie Byers. I'm a Portage Park resident, and in my day job, I work on the Illinois policy team at Start Early. We're an early childhood organization headquartered here in Chicago. And in my role, I work on a number of early childhood policy issues, including advocating for improvements for the early intervention program, and have gotten to know a lot about it over the about 12 years that I've done this work. But I actually got a whole new perspective on EI when my family enrolled in the program a few years ago to support my son, who at the time was showing some delays in crawling. He wasn't crawling like he was supposed to. He wasn't starting to walk. So we got a referral to early intervention through my pediatrician, and he ended up qualifying for 3 different therapies while we were in EI. We had developmental therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy weekly for about 2 years. I know that we really benefited from EI. And like I said, it was a whole new look at the program. And I'm just really grateful to my therapists and for everything they did for my family and for my son. And I'm really happy to be here tonight with my fellow EI parents, Elise and Samantha, to share our experiences and hopefully raise some awareness about, as Representative Gazzardi said, this really fantastic resource that's available to any family with an infant and toddler that is, concerned about a developmental disability or delay. So let's maybe kick it off with Elise and Samantha. Maybe Samantha, starting with you, could you just introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am Samantha Medellin. I have a 2-year-old currently in EI. He received his first service at 6 months. And now we've bumped up to 4 therapies a week. Love EI and the therapists that come to our homes or even virtual. It's a wonderful resource, and I'm so thankful for everything they've done for my son and our family.
And Elise, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Elise. I actually spoke to Representative LaPointe a long time ago about how much I appreciate early intervention. So I was so happy, I think over a year ago, when I heard about this opportunity to talk a bit about how important it's been. I have a 3-year-old son who just graduated out of EI. His name's August. We call him Augie. And it's just been a life-changing program for us. So I'm just so happy to be here and speak with all of you.
So let's pick it up with you, Elise. How did you first hear about the early intervention program?
Yeah, so it began with me speaking to my Augie's pediatrician about some of his delays. So just issues of at 16 months, not really saying much, not really standing up, and just starting to get a little worried, but also knowing myself that I tend to worry a lot and thinking, oh, I'm probably just overdoing it, just for my own peace of mind. And so we ended up arranging the evaluation that way.
Samantha, what about you? How did you get involved in EI?
Well, my son Levi, he was born premature. And one of the requirements to leave the NICU was to have a meeting set up with the nurse from early intervention. So I had to at least have called them to make sure they were coming to visit my son. And so the nurse did a home visit. He was only 3 months old, suggested we get a full evaluation. Then our NICU high-risk clinic at 6 months old also suggested an evaluation. And then the pediatrician, he had a flat head and they wanted physical therapy. So EI was really just rolled in right away.
So that means your evaluation process probably looked a little different than Elise's. So could you say a little bit more, like what was it like going through the evaluation, or actually probably multiple evaluations for you? in your family?
So my background is in special education. So I went in thinking I was ready for everything these evaluations were going to entail, and I was not. It was probably the hardest part for me. He was evaluated just when he was 3 months old. And there were 4 therapists and a case manager sitting in my living room asking me a million questions to see what he could and couldn't do. And it was hard to keep saying, well, no, he can't do that. Well, no, he can't do that. But, you know, in the same time, in that same like hour that they were there, they were able to tell me, well, yes, he does have this % delay and we are going to qualify him. I mean, listening to that, hearing that he was actually behind was really hard. So nobody wants to hear that their child is behind, but we are their advocates. So it was great that they were there and they were there to help him. But when we did the second evaluation, he qualified for 4 therapies at that time, which was even harder, that he had now fallen even further behind. So it was very different to go through multiple evaluations with him, especially with a 6-month-old baby. Like, you think, oh, exactly what Roberta said, you know, they grow at their own pace, and that's what we kept hearing. But with the evaluation, you really hear, or you really get to know where they're supposed to be at what age and how to help them.
Yeah, I think we had the really similar experiences. Like when they're in your, like I can, as you're talking about that, I can remember like sitting in my living room, hearing it happen and thinking like, have I failed my child? Is this fault? But I think once we got some kind of perspective around it, you know, it's like you said, it's the right thing. You have to do this for your child, thing for your child. So yeah, I don't think you're alone in that feeling at all. Elise, what about you? What was evaluation like for your family?
Yeah, actually, it's funny, Samantha, your experience actually reminds me a bit of mine, even though our children were so far apart in age when it happened. So my job is teaching psychology to college students. So I thought I was reasonably hip to kind of what it would be like and what would happen and what the expectations were. And in the back of my mind, I thought, I'm really just doing this to kind of cover my bases. I'm not that worried. I think it's going to be fine. And likewise, you know, having the set of therapists in my living room. And I remember very clearly, actually, when they started getting out the pegboard and the rings and these kinds of things that a 16-month-old should be able to engage. It was kind of like when I see my students' faces sometimes when I've handed them a test and I know they're giving me that blank look of, oh no. And that's kind of how I thought of when they got all these things out. I thought, oh, he can't do those things. He's supposed to do those things. And the more questions I asked, the more I started to realize, again, very similar to Samantha's experience, both kind of, oh no, this is a really serious kind of situation, but also kind of a sense of relief that I hadn't waited even a month longer to get this evaluation done. Because while I thought maybe, you know, he needed a little bit of speech therapy to get him talking, and maybe far off, he would need a little bit of help walking, he was scoring at about the 9-10 month range, and he was 16 months old. And that's a really big difference when you think of what a tiny baby acts like compared to a kid that's pushing 1.5 years. And so starting off with 3 therapies, it was very sobering, but I was extremely relieved that I didn't wait a second longer to get the evaluation.
So when your services started, so you said you had 3 therapies. So what was that like for 3 different people? Were they coming to your house? Did you ever have co-treatment? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so it was 3 different people, and I want to say all of them have been amazing and lovely. I've been so impressed with each of the therapists that we've worked with. But yeah, they came to the house. I really appreciated that they were very, you know, flexible in trying to work out a schedule that would work, whether they came to the house or they came to daycare or wherever he happened to be. They were very good to sort of meet those needs. We didn't do co-treatment like more of them at once, although that was an option. It just sort of didn't work out that way. But I really kept appreciating as we were doing it, how when they came, they had their own toys and their own sort of skills they wanted to work on and their own materials. And it really felt like they were sort of giving me an opportunity to see how they work with Augie, so that when they're gone, it would give me some skills to keep working on that stuff. Because again, coming in, I thought, I teach psychology to college students. questions. I know a lot of stuff. I can figure this out. But even the first few sessions, I immediately started learning, oh, they're talking to him a little differently to bring out more speech, or they're playing with him in this way to motivate him to stand up. So all of that was incredibly helpful from the start.
Yeah, I think you're like picking up on a really important distinction between early intervention and maybe some other programs, is that it's really like meant to be a parent coaching program. It's, you know, the therapists are there to, you know, facilitate this process so that you, the family, whoever the child is with, or their childcare provider, can do those things, you know, throughout the week or the 2 weeks that they're not there. And so I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind about the early intervention program. It's not really a medical model, like a medical treatment. We're coming in to treat your child. It's really about like supporting the family and supporting the child. So Samantha, what has your kind of services journey looked like?
So we started with just physical therapy because Levi had a helmet. And after it was wonderful. She came in and she was like stretching out his neck, like showing us exactly how to hold him to stretch his neck to make sure, because he wasn't turning to one side. So they were teaching us how to hold him specifically. Like I wouldn't know how to, you know, loosen up neck muscles. So it was nice to get that in our home, saying, oh, well, you have this blanket, wrap this blanket around him this way. And, you know, they really, she really used what we had in our home to help us. And once we started with 4 therapies, it was a little different. We keep trying to mesh them together to do like 2 therapies in 1 hour, but our schedule never seems to work. But all they did was exactly what Elise said. They tweaked what we were doing to make it more beneficial for Levi. And it was just like the tiniest little thing that you don't necessarily think about doing. So it was really nice. They did start and come to our house. Then COVID hit, we moved to virtual. And truthfully, I did not think this was going to be possible. How are you going to do speech online? And how are you going to do occupational therapy? You know, he has a sensory issue. He doesn't like textures. How are you going to work on this on the computer? And they went above and beyond to schedule what I needed beforehand, what I had on in my kitchen to show, you know, to help work with textures, to work on with speech. They probably spoke to me 4 times a week. We're sending messages just to make sure everything was okay. And if they needed an extra session, or if he needed something, or if I had time to go to the store to get materials. But it really was more like it brought us closer, you know, like it helped the therapist helped us to show that, you know, we really couldn't go outside anymore, but they showed us virtually how to make this work. And all they really did was coach us. And that, I mean, it's beautiful.
Elise, did you have experience with the kind of live virtual visits that Roberta talked about as well? Did you have to make the switch from in-person to virtual?
Yes, so we did as well. And likewise, I was really impressed with what we were able to do. And I do think that part of it really does go back to kind of that parent coaching model. I think if everything was meant to be happening inside the session, maybe it would have made more of a difference that we were doing it virtually as opposed to in person. But a lot of what we did was kind of working on ideas. And usually toward the end of the appointment, we'd talk about things to be working on during the week, things to be talking about doing, et cetera. So that was especially helpful. I do think that I did benefit from the fact that we did start with in-home services. And so I really do sympathize with anyone who's starting out with remote services, just because establishing that rapport and kind of learning those basic skills that you're working from, I think it was a lot easier to continue than to start. So I'm sure that presents separate challenges.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
So Carrie, can I chime in really quick?
Yes, please do.
We started developmental online, developmental therapy, and we started developmental and speech online. We had 2 in-home and 2 online. And it honestly was so smooth. He benefits so much from the developmental, and all she's doing is, okay, do this now. Okay, say this instead of this. Okay, what you're going to try to do is maybe hold this doll up and say, look, Levi, it's a doll, say doll. And it was so smooth and easy. Do not like deter because it's going to only be virtual. This is still beautiful. Even though we started out virtual with 2 additional therapies, it worked out so well.
Yeah. I always had in person, but I can imagine that the telehealth, I think we could have made it work. But you just mentioned your developmental therapist, and so I loved all of our therapists, but I do want to put a special plug in for the developmental therapist, because ours, and I feel like she was the glue that held it all together. Helped us make sense of the others all together. And I just, to this day, I feel like those are the activities that she brought and coached us in are the ones that I don't know, sometimes we still bring some of those things out, and the bubbles and the different sensory activities that we did with her. Right. So none of you have had to do the transition to early childhood special education? Or actually, Elise, you did, your son graduated. So did you do an evaluation through CPS, or were your therapist not recommending that because of the progress?
So we did make progress, lots. So based on his last sort of because each year you get a reevaluation. Based on his final evaluation, he looked like he had made a lot of progress, not completely caught up, but not enough delay that he would even qualify for EI had he been tested at that point. CPS tests, as I understand it, somewhat differently, that it's a bit more academic and less on the sort of basic developmental skills, even though those 2 things might be related. So we were interested in whether there might be more of a delay in that context. So we got the evaluation. It was similar in terms of there being a bunch of different people evaluating, it taking a while. Of course, we did it remotely and that was different. But in our case, he didn't show any delays in that evaluation at all, which was amazing, and had actually almost everyone was tearing up by the end of it, just because things just looked quite scary and bleak when we first got our initial EI evaluation. And at that point, I didn't know when I would hear him say mom, or whether he'd have trouble walking, or whether he'd even go to mainstream school at all. And the idea that he wouldn't even go in with any IEP or needing special services, of course, we're keeping an eye on him that he might need help later, but I couldn't believe it. They called him a poster child for early intervention, because they were saying that it's somewhat common that kids have these sort of issues earlier on, and then if you can get in there and really learn some extra skills, that those kids need that extra help to get them up to speed, and then they kind of start off on a more kind of level playing field with any other typically developing kid at that stage. So that was great for us.
Yeah. Samantha, what about you? When do you end your early intervention journey?
We just turned 2 last week, so we still have another year of EI. But you can the therapists have already been in and out of his IEP. They've taken steps back and they've come back. So it really is a fluid system.
So I guess now I'd like to ask, you've talked about a lot of things that are great about the EI program, but maybe what are the things that you like best? What's the best part about being an EI? And Samantha, let's start with you.
There's so many amazing things about EI. Really how knowledgeable our therapists are. We've had now 5 different therapists, and 6 if you include the nurse, and every one of them has spoken to Levi like they're best friends. When they walk in, he right away grabs his favorite thing to do with them and runs to them. He doesn't even come and hug me in the mornings, and he runs to hug them, and it really just becomes like they're your friends. You talk to them and they're like, oh, how was your vacation? Or how was your son's birthday? Or what did you guys do last week? And it's not as terrifying as we thought. These people are going to come to our house and it's going to be very terrifying, and they're going to judge how our house looks, and they don't care about any of that. They care about your son or your kid. So it was really nice to see the relationship that he developed with his therapist, and how he's really flourished since he started at 6 months old. I mean, he was screaming day and night and not speaking and hitting. He doesn't touch things. He wasn't eating. And now he is a completely different kid, you know, and it's because of EI that we can really attribute all these skills. And he adores them. So when I'm on the phone, he runs and says their name. I'm like, it's not them. It's not Tuesday at 9 o'clock, buddy. So there's so many great things about EI, but those are definitely my favorites.
You're making me tear up because I'm thinking about how much how hard those goodbyes were to, Rachel and Miss Lisa. And similarly, like I remember we had a session, I think Monday mornings at like 8 or 9 a.m. And I was always so grateful because I'm like, okay, I've just had Sunday, I've cleaned my house and and it's not a disaster yet. Even though I think you're right, I don't think they would have cared less, or they could have cared less. My house was clean. Elise, what about you?
So there is so much to like. Piggybacking off of what Samantha said a bit, those relationships with the EI therapists have been amazing. And I can't believe, honestly, how hard they work and how personally invested they are, especially when I think about what their caseload must be. The fact that every time they show up, it's clear they've been thinking in the interim what they want to do, what they want to move toward next, how he was working last week. And just the sense that they're really cheerleading you and your kid on and your family and kind of making this work. It was so great to have the sort of, we're still seeing our speech therapist from EI now through our insurance because he still needs some speech therapy. And so we finally were actually reunited with the speech therapist that we had worked with through EI in person. And it was amazing because we had just been sort of separated by iPad this whole time. And so being able to have, an in-person appointment, I mean, it was just, he was so excited. And honestly, I wasn't even sure how much he'd remember her. It's been a while, the iPad's a bit strange a modality. And every day since then, he's been asking to play with her. And I did want to mention that too, that while it kind of seems like therapy or work, and it is, when the therapists are there, at least for our experience, they were so good at making it feel like play for Augie. And so they had toys, they were very sneaky, you might say, about being able to work on these skills while still making it fun for the kid. So it didn't feel like pushing him, making him do this, he's being tested, here, say this. It wasn't like that at all. They played games, they motivated, they'd run around and say bubbles. One of the first sounds that he made was she just wanted to make a sound when he popped the bubble. She would just say pop, 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 and pop these bubbles. And then he would finally kind of start making a little pop, pop sound. And that's sort of the way that so many of these skills came out in this very kind of active, playful kind of atmosphere. One last thing that was really important to me too, and this isn't for me specifically, but just sort of knowing it, is that these services were so great. And I just kept thinking, and I still think about it now, that the fact that everyone, at least in theory, I know specific access issues exist, but in theory has access to this absolutely Cadillac level of therapist and service, just the fact that regardless of people's ability to pay, that this wasn't some fancy thing that I happen to have through certain insurance, that this was something that everyone can get. And I couldn't believe it, honestly, because even when I pay out of pocket or do something through insurance, it's usually nowhere near that level of engagement and a positive experience. So that too has really meant a lot to me. I think I wouldn't feel as wonderful about it if it wasn't for the fact that I feel like, wow, I get this, and it's not just my kid, it's every kid has access to this. Yeah.
So as you mentioned, and I think Roberta mentioned too, EI, I think we can all agree that EI, we had a really wonderful EI experience, and that it really can transform lives. But that doesn't mean the program is perfect either. So I think from your parent perspective, like what are some ways that we could maybe strengthen the EI program or improve the EI program? And Samantha, maybe you can go first.
I think it is more about like awareness and the stigma that comes with EI services. I stated previously, like my background is in special education. And when people hear that my child has EI, they're like, oh, that must be awful. I'm like, no, this is amazing. Like the therapist comes and we play and we learn how to do this. And so word of mouth. I'm very open about Levi services and how many therapies we have and what we do to help him when the therapist is not there. And I've spoken to a lot of parents that come and say, well, what is that? What is EI? I didn't even know that was a thing. And it truly breaks my heart that they just don't know. And I feel like getting the word out is so important. Like Elise said, like they really have these amazing people at their feet, and they just have to reach out and attempt to get services. But that really would be it. Like in the program, we have had nothing but amazing experiences. Like a forgotten email here and there, it happens. But really just that stigma and really providing your child with services, even getting them evaluated, is a crucial thing. If you see any delays or anything sparks up, that seems kind of odd, instead of saying, oh, that seems odd, he'll grow out of it, mentioning it,
Yeah. That kind of like public awareness, normalizing, any child could benefit from something like this. And it doesn't mean anything about your performance or value as a parent.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. Elise, what about you? How would you strengthen the EI program?
Yeah, so my thought is sort of related to Samantha's, but maybe from a little different angle. I did feel a bit like I mentioned theoretical accessibility a moment ago. And I think the theoretical part is the part that to me is a place that could be improved. And basically the idea is that, going into this, I'm like reasonably sort of hands-on when it comes to knowing what the milestones are. I'm a little bit sort of intense when it comes to figuring out, okay, what needs to happen and those kinds of things. And because I'm in academia and in psychology, just the terminology and what's going on, and just having friends that work with special needs kids. So I feel like I was kind of going into it with a bit more knowledge maybe than a typical average parent. And because of that, I kept kind of wondering how many more barriers might there be if I hadn't been in that particular position. So for example, I was the one that brought it up to my pediatrician. My pediatrician didn't bring it up to me. Now they might have later, but I was the one that kind of came to them and said, I'm really worried. Do you think I should try this? And then they said, you know what, that actually sounds like it might be a good idea. And part of that maybe is sort of working with pediatricians to sort of have them, since there really is nothing to lose in an evaluation. I mean, best case scenario, they say, looks like your kid is caught up, no problem. And then you get to work with that knowledge and have that piece. And of course, if they need the help, it's really good to get it as soon as possible. So maybe it's potentially networking with pediatricians to make sure that information is more out there. But I might even say getting that information more out to parents directly, which hopefully is happening a bit as we do this today. But really empowering parents to kind of know the services available, how to access it, because I just didn't necessarily go through that process feeling that it would have been easy for any parent to just up and know about how to do this, especially if their pediatrician hadn't brought it up first. And again, because these services are so amazing, I wouldn't want anyone to miss out on it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I can remember going through the evaluation and, I sort of like, I knew what was supposed to be happening, and all of a sudden they started talking about what services he needed. And I remember stopping and saying, like, I'm sorry, are we writing an IFSP right now? And they kind of looked at me like, okay, you know what an IFSP is. I'm like, yeah, I know what an IFSP is. But I can think of parents who didn't know that you were supposed to leave that evaluation with a written plan, an individualized family service plan that spelled out what the services were. And, they asked me what my goals were for him. And I was like, oh God, do I have to say right now? Can I sit and think about this? And so I think that's totally right, that there needs to be almost some more, it's like pre-EI support, or like some sort of process to like walk you through, like, what is this? What are your rights? Here, you don't have to decide right now in this, evaluation what's going on. That's I think a really good point, Elise. So I think we're getting close to the end of our discussion time. So kind of final question for you both is, what advice would you give to other parents who might just be starting EI or are concerned about their young child's development, or perhaps they've heard from someone else, like a family member, that they're concerned? Samantha, what about you?
Well, if they're just starting in AI, basically just remember the whole process takes time. It takes time to contact everyone, to schedule a meeting, to really start everything, to keep practicing exactly what the therapist teaches you. And if you haven't started EI and you're just concerned, so my biggest saying is it takes a village to raise a child, and these therapists come and evaluate, and that is part of our village now. If you have any sort of concern about your child's development, like reach out. You know your child best, just like Elise went to her pediatrician and said, hey, something is wrong, something is up. You are your child's best advocate. So
Good advice. Elise?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest advice would be get the evaluation, just 1,000 times get the evaluation. There really is no downside. I know we've talked a little bit about how there's a bunch of people and it takes a while. It's about 3 hours and they ask some questions, and it's just really, really worth it when you think about, the entire lifespan of your kid and how much it might help them. Especially when you think about the possibility that intervening sooner might mean that when they get into school that they don't need those special services, and they'll be starting out sort of with a better sense of what's going on. There's even really practical stuff, like it was just getting him walking sooner, getting to talk to him sooner. I couldn't wait to do it, and I know every parent probably feels like that. And so if you're thinking, oh well, maybe I'll wait for the intervention, well, think about if maybe you could get to talk to them a few months earlier than you would have, and the difference that might make for their development over their life and your relationship with them and everything else. Just every sort of second kind of matters. And the other, which is sort of related, is just, this is such a great program, and after 3, it's gone. And so, you don't want to wait till your kid's 2.5 years old to start thinking about this, because there is a process of evaluation, setting up therapists, getting that going, starting to see results. And so if you can get in on that at 1-year-old, that's going to be a lot more time to be in this program than if you're 2. So the sooner the better if you have concerns, as far as my personal belief.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm so glad to have met you both, and I'm just so appreciative of you being so open about your EI experiences. So Lindsay, I don't know if we have any questions for Samantha or Elise or Roberta.
Yeah, we do. We have, well, first of all, let me just say how powerful that all was. So powerful to I feel like I was in your living rooms with you. And for me as a lawmaker, I wish I had that on all the issues that I get to take votes on and make decisions on. Like, unbelievable what you just shared. And I think that such a key takeaway for me was the last thing we were just talking about, which is, you've both shared your really phenomenal experiences and what it meant to your children and your families. How do we, and this is it's on all of us, but it's very much on me as a lawmaker, and Carrie as a policy advocate, how do we make sure that every family knows about this, and that every family has the opportunity to access it? And part of that is, I think, is stigma, and making sure we're doing everything we can to decrease stigma. And part of it, I'm really big on this concept of being responsive. And to me, being responsive, this whole program sounds responsive, but being responsive is in the context of these types of services is the opposite of the medical model. The medical model is when the professional is just in their office, and in order to access services, and even that just feels elitist, you have to, get the golden ticket or whatever it is. You show up, you have to go there. And to me, this program is very responsive. It meets families where they're at, literally coming into living rooms, and not just providing services to a child, And that's another thing. You both did a really great job of explaining. This isn't just about providing services to a child. It's about providing services to a whole family and really helping families and parents in particular build their skills so they can continue to do the EI intervention after the therapist is gone. So what you've all shared is just very powerful. So thank you for that. There's a comment that came in, and so I'm gonna, as I pull that up, I do want to ask if you, I have a question I would like to ask. And this is really unique because we have parents, we have policy advocate, we have Roberta who works at this coordinator level. So Roberta, what can you tell us about what are the barriers to access and what are some of the solutions to bulldoze those barriers so everyone in Illinois who might be eligible for this program has an opportunity?
Right. So it's a great question. And the barriers just depend on, they're as diverse as the people in our area, right? Sometimes it's a language barrier. And they'll try to leave a message. Many times a doctor will just say, call this number. And you have to realize that over the weekend, Mary, who takes all of the phone calls, gets 200 phone calls, and she has to sort through them to find out, is this coming from a preschool? Is this coming from a parent? And know that we're working from home. So we're calling back right now from a blocked number, our cell phone block. So the barriers are some parents won't pick up the phone with that kind of thing going on. So that's just one of many. But I just want to put this out there. On the north side, we have the largest CFC. We used to serve 3,000 kids. During COVID, that number dropped to 2,000 children. And some of that was because we had doctors and others who said, live video visits don't work for me as a doctor, a physician. So how could it possibly work? Again, thinking clinical model. And so we had a lot of parents that waited, and right now we're actually being inundated with referrals, which is a good thing, but it's going to take a while. And like Samantha said, thank you so much for saying that. It's a process. From the day that we get your referral to the time we get you evaluated, a child evaluated, it can take up to 45 days. So, and that's again why, thank you so much, both of you, Elise, and for saying, do it, don't wait. There's no bad side to it. I mean, best case scenario, you don't need our services, you know, and worst case scenario is still best, right? Because they come alongside and support the family. So, so there's just a few right there. Coordination. And I want to say too, that throughout the state, there's a push for the service coordinators to have a doable caseload. And right now, because of COVID, it's more around 50-60. But before COVID, each therapist, each service coordinator who coordinated services was serving 100 kids. So the time it would take to explain something, it just wasn't what they would like it to have been. They would have loved to have a full hour to share, here's what the program does, here's what it doesn't. And so things just get pushed through quickly. So they'd have 100 cases plus another 20 that are new in intake. And that's just, they did it. God bless them. They were amazing. But as we're moving up in numbers, I just really appreciate those that are trying to keep an eye on those numbers, because we want to keep it a good program.
And can I add, I just want to say, I think Roberta is so absolutely right that the program, as wonderful as it is still under-resourced. And we really just need more resources to bring those caseloads down. We don't have enough therapists in some parts of the city and many parts of the state. And telehealth those live video visits, there are one, strategy that I think is going to help that a lot. I think about the barriers for families that might be highly mobile, experiencing homelessness, housing instability. When you're in the city of Chicago, you're covered by 4 different child and family connections, those CFCs. And so if you're moving around the city, the live video visits can help, like your therapist can follow you seamlessly as you go. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't barriers around internet connection and having devices. That's another thing that I think the early intervention program with more resources could make sure that families have those resources so they can engage. And then the other strategy I just want to plug, something we've been talking about for a while too, is the idea of specialized teams within early intervention, because right now most of our therapists are independent contractors. So they choose where they go and what families they work with. They don't get paid unless they actually provide the service. So if you think, I'm a therapist that's working with a family that has a lot going on in their lives, maybe they're moving around, and I've driven to their home and then they're not there, something happened. Now I don't get paid for that. Specialized teams, we can hire a team of therapists that are paid, that are maybe get some extra training if they're working with maybe a child who's in a foster child, a family that just might have some more complex needs. That I think that's a solution that we should really be looking at, those kind of innovations in the early intervention program.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to share a comment that came in on Facebook, which speaks to the theme of access and awareness. And it's from Angela. And Angela says, please continue to engage preschool teachers to be sure they are aware of the program and how it benefits their practice. Angela says she certainly didn't know anything about EI or have an awareness of the services that some of her former preschoolers had experienced through EI. Let's see. She had no clue that she could have benefited from connecting with therapists about what they had been working on leading up to a child's transition. That's powerful. And it's a thank you, Angela, for sharing that.
And can I just say that at each office, there's someone who's in a position like myself, who we're called the LIC coordinator. And so it's our job to network. And so we build community partnerships with many preschools in this area: Onward Neighborhood House, Christopher House, Casa Central. There's many preschools that work with us, and they have a disability coordinator, and they refer directly to us. I think a lot of the ones who don't know about us are the ones that are the home-based daycares and preschools, and we would love to reach out to them. So I'm just putting it out there. If anyone would like to have information brought to their center, I'm happy to do that.
Terrific. And Angela, let's make this connection between you and Roberta. I have a question that goes in a little bit of a different direction. And I know we're pushing on 8 o'clock, so we'll wrap up shortly, but okay. So I feel a lot of joy here, and we've mentioned different therapists that are part of this. And what I really want to get at, I'm thinking about anyone listening now or later who maybe they want to be a therapist in the future. And this is just a great helping profession. And I feel like so often young people don't get a chance to think broadly enough about what they might want to do with their life, and the various ways that you can help families, sometimes paid ways, sometimes unpaid ways. So what are the actual kinds of therapists? Give us a little more detail about the different kinds of therapists that are involved in EI, and pretend I'm a 16-year-old that's excited that might want to be a therapist in the future. So we can give people the information that they need to explore this. And what kind of degrees does it take?
Right. So there are so many different areas, but the main ones are physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, developmental therapy. That would be like an early childhood specialist degree, because they're like the teacher for the young ones. We also have some nurses that do consulting with kids who have medical needs that might need to know how to do that at home. It's just consulting. But we also have social workers, and I'm putting a big plug out there for all of our social workers who come alongside of families that are really struggling with prioritizing the needs or finding community resources, who may be helping with kids who maybe are learning great, they're brilliant, but they're just struggling with attention and being able to sit still long enough to hear you, to learn something. So there are behavior specialists and social workers as well that do an amazing job in our program. All of those are places that you could go to any university. And what happens is you get licensed through your state, and then through the early intervention program, you can sign up to work in any area of the state. Of course, I'm going to push for the north side. Does that help? Is that?
I think it does. I think in my next life, if I wanted to be an EI therapist, I think I know where to start now.
Great.
Let's see. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. We'll give it a pause and see if anyone wants to chime in on a few things before we wrap up. But this has really been a phenomenal conversation with really a unique perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's close with this one. We've touched on a lot, and as somebody that gets to make decisions on things related to funding and the existence of these programs, I am incredibly moved by what I've heard. What is one additional thing from each of you that you definitely want your state lawmaker to know about EI?
Can I start?
Please.
This is funded by IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act. 3 to 21, 3 years to 21 is handled by the schools, but birth to 3 is covered by Part C. And for both parts, for Part B and Part C, it's funded federally only by about 35%. And so the rest creatively, EI has funded it by using insurance to pay for some of it, and by using a family fee, which is a sliding fee scale, very generous for, I believe, for those that want to participate that have a higher income. So all that I want to say is that we need to keep an eye on the funding, and that it keeps coming through, and that we don't put any barriers to that funding coming in, because it is such a supportive system. The dollars really do make a difference in the future of the kids. They're actually saving money down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is loud and clear.
Lindsay, I'll just add on top of what Roberta just said. You know, in Governor Pritzker's proposed budget this year, there's a $7 million cut proposed to the early intervention program. And a lot of that is because that they're basing that on the current caseloads, when we expect, as Roberta said, she's already seen caseloads go up. I would just kind of encourage you to keep in mind that advocates are asking for a $25 million increase to the program to do things like make sure telehealth is here to stay and it's supported, to do the kind of innovations that, you know, we just talked about around those specialized teams. I just saw a comment about timely payments to providers. We'd also love to see increases to to provider reimbursement rates. I think they've been and remain low. You know, our early childhood providers are some of the most undercompensated, you know, people out there, especially for the work that they do. And the other thing that, just to plug too, in the lame duck session back in January, there was actually some legislation passed that allows for kids that turn 3 May 1st through August 31st, if they've been in the early intervention program, they can now stay in the early intervention program starting in 2022 until the school year starts. Because typically, you know, if you turned 3 in, you know, May 1st, your services, as kind of Elise said, your services stop, and now you have nothing for 4 months, and it's just this cliff. So funding for the program, helps, I think, create that kind of continuity as well.
Excellent.
So something slightly different. My occupational therapist had contacted me to write a letter regarding how important it is to have these therapists separated. They are experts in their field. And so there was something about having them do, basically pick your most important therapy, and that one therapist would provide every individual therapy that needed. So if I really thought occupational therapy was a need for my son, I would have the occupational therapist also be the developmental therapist and the speech therapist, and that cannot happen. They are experts in their own right and in their own field, and they really are extremely valuable to do separate services.
Yeah, I would just speak up, Samantha, on that, in that I agree with you completely. There are some families that come to me, though, that have so many therapies that they want to do some of it together, and teaming might work for some kids, but for those who have very specific needs in each of those areas, it's really important that they keep all of those therapies separate.
So I think I have the least sort of industry specific knowledge, so I'll just sort of speak generally from the mom side alone. If in terms of thinking of how to talk to legislators about it, when you think about the fact that these kids that are coming through early intervention, they're going to be the adults in our state, the teens in our state, they're going to be coming up and being generations of people in our state. And when I think about Augie being an EI, I often think about sort of, the course of a plane or a ship. And, you go a little bit off track at the beginning and you correct it and you end up right in the place that you hoped to be. But those little decisions you make early on have these massive implications for what happens later. And so if you have a kid that doesn't get access to these services, whether it's because of issues of accessibility, if there's issues of funding, or even maybe if there's issues of paying therapists and there's problem getting the right people or the people with the right expertise, those tiny decisions so early on can have these massive, massive consequences later on down the line. And so when you think about things like funding or support or training or any of these things, you're thinking of, okay, what's the price on the course of life for that whole generation of people coming up and then all the generations that follow them. So I think it's impossible to even think about what the limit would be on what that should be worth to people in Illinois.
Very, very powerful. Thanks for sharing all that. And what I will say as we wrap up is this curtain right here on EI and everything I just learned and everything that some members of the public just learned came from conversations with me. Elise, I remember that conversation we had a year ago when you spoke super highly of EI. And so it's important for, whatever it is, a lot of people reach out to their lawmakers and elected representatives to express what they're not happy about. And that's important too. And I'm glad, but also make sure you reach out and talk about what you are happy with. In this case, in my case, we're talking about state government and what state government is able to provide. But it's really important for us to hear that too. And it leads to conversations like this. So that's what I will leave everybody with. Don't hesitate to reach out, talk about the good things that you're concerned, that you value a lot, and of course, share your big concerns too. All right, it's 8:11. So we're gonna close it out. Thanks so much, Carrie, Roberta, Elise, and Samantha. It's been a real pleasure. And I will also say on behalf of my co-hosts, Representative Guzzardi, Representative Andrade, and Senator Cristina Pasiones-Zayas, who of course is an expert on this in her own right. They are big supporters, and we're even though some of them couldn't be here tonight, very happy to co-host.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Good night, everyone.
Good night.